Hey folks, Steve here with another Fatal Alliances video. This episode is sort of a part two from last time, looking at morale and production. In the last video, we sort of pre-calculated what our current morale situation was for each major power, which I recorded here in the notes. And we also looked at the production, basically validating what each major power was able to create in terms of build points, and then how many offensive points did they need to build, as well as how much of their production, their build points, were going to spending on the home front, which is meant to offset the coming morale hits that are going to be coming very shortly. So, with that complete, I think for this video what we're going to do is we're going to go through and actually choose what units we're going to build for each major power. We're going to conduct the strategic warfare phase, which is really quick and actually doesn't show up on the sequence of play for whatever reason, but it does take place right after production and before morale. Then we'll implement the morale hits, and we'll talk a little bit about the political action of subversion, which rather than some of the other political options and actions that you can take in the turn, it actually occurs during the morale phase. So we'll get into that. What I also have done between videos is I cleared up our big massive counters here. They've all now been replaced back into the force pools in the places that they belong. So that is all well and good, or should be good, for actually building units and being able to pull from the pertinent force pools, depending on what we pick. Now that we can actually look at building units, I want to talk a little bit about a really interesting part of the World in Flames system. It's in World War II World in Flames, it's in Fatal Alliances, and that is gearing limits. So if you've played PC games, the latest, or I think even most of the Hearts of Iron World War II strategy games have gearing limits, and so I'm already used to the idea of gearing limits from those PC games, so when I started playing this, it sort of made sense right away. But gearing limits is a way to sort of model your economy and your production in terms of if you build the same sort of equipment and the same sort of, you get used to training men a certain way, you get better and better at it as long as you keep up the momentum, and that's the gearing limit. And so basically on the first turn of any scenario, there are no gearing limits, meaning when we go to build stuff this turn, we can build as much of any certain type of unit as we want. Once that's done, however, in future turns, we can only build the limit of what we built last turn plus 1, which means if you don't build any infantry, for instance, in a given turn, the very next turn you can only build 1, and then 2 after that, 3 after that. And so there's a certain strategy to, always making sure that you're building a certain type of unit every turn so that you can keep up that momentum over and over again. If you want to read the actual rules for gearing limits, it's in 13.5.5.8. It's just under the build production rules. And basically, those gearing limits are in classes, and the classes are structured as INF, INF, meaning, short for infantry, but basically any unit that is an HQ, infantry, militia, garrison, marines, mountain units, engineers, territorials, and gas units are all considered infantry, or I would say like foot land units. That's its own class. So, you don't have to have a separate gearing for engineers because there's only so many of them. As long as you're building that many units, that keeps that gearing limit going. There's cavalry, which is its own class of gearing. Here, I'll just put the rules on the board here on the screen that I'm sharing so you can see it. Cavalry, artillery is its own, meaning any artillery. There are different variants of artillery, but they're all treated the same. Armored units, including the mechanized units, so armor and mechanized. Pilots are their own. Air units are all their own. Subs are separate from other naval units. Forts and entrenchments are have their own gearing limits, and there is a difference between a fort and an entrenchment. And naval, so any naval unit that is not a submarine is counted for the same gearing limit. So a convoy, a transport, a battleship, they all have the same gearing limit for their convoys count. Two convoys count as one naval unit, or one, if you're only building one, would count as one naval unit. So that, for the most part, it isn't a big deal, but keep in mind you can't go from building a heck ton of infantry and then switching gears and trying to build a whole bunch of naval. You sort of have to be prepared to spool that up and have it go. And it may mean that you're sort of limited, even if you, I guess, think about it this way. If you're building a bunch of units and you build 3 one turn, you could build 4 the next turn, but if you can only afford to build 3, then your build limit for the next turn after that is still going to be 4. So just keep that in mind. It's sort of, you don't want to slow down and where you're going. But for this first turn, all that really matters is we're going to try to build things that we need, while also keeping in mind that in the future we would want to be able to build off of the gearing limits that we set. So we're just going to go through. I've got my notes from last time over here on another screen. So the German production ends up having 10 build points, and I was thinking maybe we want to build some land units, maybe we want to build some planes. I did look to see how many pilots are available, and it looks like we have 2 pilots, so we could build some planes. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we actually have any besides some Zeppelins. There's 1 Zeppelin we could build. That might not be a bad idea, but I think we want to keep it, if we build this 1 air unit, that's going to be a waste of a gearing limit because we're not going to build any more air units until 1915. So we probably are just going to build some infantry, maybe some cavalry. Looks like we got a few cavalry, so let's do this. I'm going to put my production circle on here, and what we'll do is we'll build 2 infantry and 1 cav. So I'm just going to take a note for my gearing limit in my notes here that we're building 2 infantry, 1 cav. So we're going to draw and put it on here 2 turns ahead. So 1 infantry and another infantry. And they got dragged over here. I'm just going to flip them. I want to see what they are. Oh, I got a good draw. That's a 4-2 and a 6-3. That's pretty good. And we'll get the cavalry as well, only it's 3 turns away, so it won't be until January, February will we get that unit. That leaves Germany with 1 production left over, or 1 build point left over. And we'll say 1 build point saved. Now the one thing is, if you save build points, they have to go on the map somewhere in a factory to show that you have, basically they can be captured, they can be destroyed. So you can save up to 4 build units per hex containing a usable factory. Save build points can be railed-like resources, destroyed by strategic bombardment, or captured by enemy units. So for the 1 saved build point, we probably don't want to put it in a place that can be easily captured. I'm going to go to markers. I think it's other. And let's see. I need to make it 1. For some reason, that's only a 2. Why? Let's see. Okay, so I don't have a really great counter for saved build points because it says 2, but it really needs to be 1. And I think the think the vassal module is screwed up a little bit, so we will just change the really one build point. Okay. So the one build point, and we'll put it pretty far away from any enemies. We'll put it in Leipzig here. Yep, there's a factory. Cool. So we will set it there. The safe build point is stored up in Leipzig for the moment, and we'll probably consume it next time when we get an opportunity. We won't be able to use that build point for morale, but we could funnel it into offensive points. Actually, come to think of it, maybe we should just build another offensive point. We can always spend more than the minimum required. So actually, I think that's what we're going to do. So we're just going to delete that, and we'll find our German one here, and it's actually going to be 3 points. And I'll just mark that one additional O point. So just so you see, I'm recording this in notes. Again, you'll want to put this down on paper, but my builds were infantry, 2 infantry, 1 cav, and an additional offensive point in addition to the 2 that we already had been putting together from before. So just listing out how we did that. And O points are not subject to gearing limits, so you can always start building as many as you would like. At least I'm pretty certain. Yeah, they ignore gearing, so they're good to go. Okay, so that's it for Germany. Germany's production is done. And now we'll move on to Austria-Hungary. They have 5 points. I think we're just going to have them build land units as well. So let's see. Let's have them build, get our production chart over here. They're going to build this Austrian corps, and then they're also going to build this Austrian militia. And so that Austrian corps went 2 turns ahead over here. The militia only takes 1 turn to build, so it was built up here. And let's see here. That cost 5, so that was 2 infantry for gearing for the Austro-Hungarians. What you're going to find as you do this is that you're going to be building a lot of land units, and you kind of need to. And just in terms of like the strategy, yes, there are going to be the points where you're going to need to build more air units. You're going to need to build, maybe more naval units. I think it's going to be really hard for major powers to kind of find the extra cash to build other stuff. But yeah, I guess that's just the way it is. It's always tough. So Austria-Hungary's done. France only has 4 points. 4 points. What to do? Well, they could. Yeah, this is what they'll do. They will start building another corps. Actually, come to think of it, what are our militia left? Marseille and Lyon. Actually, France is going to build 2 militia because they don't take long to build, and they can get them out to the front fairly quickly. Yeah, we'll do that, and that keeps the gearing limit up. So France is spending all 4 of its build points for 2 infantry for gearing. Russia has 10 build points. And let's see, what do we want to do here? Obviously, Russia's going to have to build a lot of infantry. That's just sort of its shtick, and it's going to want that gearing limit to be pretty high. I think we want to get an engineer out. Engineers are pretty useful, and they can pay off dividends later. So I just think that's worth it. So we'll do an engineer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It takes a very long time to build. That's for 3, so 7 left. I don't know that these Serbian units are going to be around to actually survive. Lots of militia left. Let's do here's what we'll do. So we got 7 left. We'll do 2 infantry. So that's a total of 3 infantry so far for gearing purposes. The 2 corps that we just built or started building, and the engineer division counts as another unit. That leaves us with 1. I think we'll do another O point. Just taking the note down. Okay, so yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll do another O point. So over here on our, you can see I'm setting up again. I should make sure to clarify, when you build a new unit, you draw randomly from your force pool, and if you're playing with the physical version of the game, put all your counters in a cup or whatever, and you draw, and then you're going to place it on the production circle, the white number away from what the current turn is. So militia, 1 turn is simply the next turn. For a corps that's say 2, 1, 2, you place it. And so we're going to find Russia's O points, and we're going to increase that now. Okay. Yep. Okay, now we look at the United States. Now they have 6 production, or I'm sorry, yeah, 6 build points. But they're kind of limited in what they can build. They can't build anything but naval units, and they have to be anything but amphibious units. So I think what we'll do is we'll spend we have a couple of ships that are in the construction pool that we could do. We could finish building them. Or we could start building some new units. And I think I actually want to start building more units, because we can get to the rest of those ships. So I'm going to start with 2 transports. So that's 4 build points. And then 1 surface vessel. Okay. And that's essentially 3 naval units for gearing limits, and that takes all of their production. Yeah. Okay. And then just to talk about how that works for these other, so once the turn marker gets to the point where it enters where face-down naval units are on the build cycle. They flip face up and they go to the construction pool. Then, once they're in the construction pool, you can pay the second build cost, so in this case 3 for the Oklahoma and California counters here. Then they're put on the turn track again for the same number of turns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they're built and can be placed. So ships take a really, really long time. So you gotta really plan. If you're gonna build new units, you gotta plan ahead. We could have also looked at trying to repair these units. Repairing takes 2 turns, but you also have to put the build cost back into them, which some of these are actually 0, so it might be a good idea to try to repair these guys at some point, but Germany needs the needed the gearing limit for other stuff. Anyway, now the Commonwealth has 7, and boy, they're kind of hurting. I think in this case we need to get the HQ back, so we're going to put the HQ for 5. So that's going to be 1 infantry for gearing, and then with 2 left over, let's see, what are these militia? Yeah. I think we need the planes back too. I think. Yeah, we're gonna do planes. We do have pilots available, so we'll do that. Something to know about planes. Let me just mark this down for the gearing. A lot of the rules for planes are in, I think it's 16. And right now we're just dealing with land units, so there's not a whole lot more we can really do. We have plenty of pilots, so we don't need to build or train any new pilots, which is good. So this is right here. So pilots. So Germany has 2 pilots, Commonwealth has 2 pilots, Russia has 2 pilots. That means we can build a couple of actual plane counters and place them immediately on the board, but in order to do that, you have to have an equivalent pilot. So France could build 1 plane unit and place it. But at some point, these powers are probably going to want to start putting together some pilots for future plane units that come into the game. Just something to keep in mind. Again, all part of that long-term strategy of what kind of units do you want to have available when the time comes to do it. So no problem there. So let's see. Just making sure there's nothing else I need to worry about right now. Yeah, and so then air units are going to go. Their turn. They don't have a white circle here for the number of turns. It's equal to their build cost. So 2 build points to build the planes. They come in 2 turns from now. So in November, December. All right, sorry, I had a cough there. Okay. So I think that's it for the normal what units to build. So at this point, all the powers have spent out their build points. None of them are going to be saving any build points. And, essentially, we're going to move into the strategic warfare. Now, as it is right now, there's really not a lot of possibilities for strategic warfare. So, like, strategic bombardment or strategic bombing is done during the action phase and is used by, say, like a Zeppelin to hit spaces with factories to reduce the opponent's build points. That's strategic bombing. But in terms of strategic warfare, what that really is meaning is it basically just stuff that's having to do with the naval stuff, with convoys and submarines. So I guess keep that in mind. And then we're going to look at the only place left for strategic bombardment. So let's see here. I need to find it back in the rules now. Give me 1 second here. I keep scrolling right past it. Okay, so in the latest rules, it's on page 25, 13.5.6, of strategic warfare. After you finish building units, conduct strategic warfare at sea. Strategic warfare allows you to do a little extra damage on enemy convoys spread around the world by picking off stragglers and lone sailing ships. For each sea zone where you have a sub, aircraft, or surface vessel at war with convoy points in the sea zone, not in port, roll a die, consult the bombing strategic warfare table. For strategic warfare, the column is determined by the lesser of the number of surface vessels, subs, and aircraft with air-to-sea factors at war with enemy convoys, or the number of enemy convoys in the sea zone. As the Germans are involved here, they could declare unrestricted U-boat warfare, but that would cause a U.S. entry chit pull to probably happen, and I don't think we want to do that yet. The result on the table is the number of convoy points sunk, and the defender would get to choose which, but I'm not really sure why they have much choice here. If one side initiated strategic warfare with submarines, the other side can attempt to damage or sink them. The column is determined by the lesser of the number of surface vessels and aircraft at war with enemy submarines, or the number of enemy submarines in the sea zone. Then you'd also get to add a die roll to that because basically the naval powers got better at finding submarines once they popped out of the water to attack a convoy. So something that I did that I shouldn't have done before was I had some ships here and I sent them back home. I should not have done that. So I'm going to reverse time again for the purposes of a proper demonstration like I did with the Europa over here in the last video. We're going to say that these two units stayed at sea, and let's see, I guess they would be in the 2 or 1 box, doesn't really matter for these purposes. So these guys are going to be sitting here, they're sort of escorting these convoys, and we're going to get to do our die rolls here. So on the game charts, I don't normally show the game charts, but we'll just have it up here for a second. So we're going to do that die roll. So first we're going to roll for the Germans against the convoys here. Obviously they're targeting the Commonwealth 8 convoys. The lesser of the number of subs or enemy convoys, so it's going to be 1. So let's see. Just a 1. So to actually take out a convoy, we're going to need to roll a 9 or a 10 on a d10. So 20% chance. And we actually hit. Hey! Excellent. That's great. Oh, that's great. Awesome. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to need to set this to 7, so bear with me here. Alright, so that gets reduced to 7, and we actually, because the build cost for a convoy is 1 point, the this strategic warfare TBD is now increased up to 32. So that was good for the Germans. Excellent, excellent. And now, by comparison, the defenders, I should say, are also going to roll. So they have surface naval vessels. If these ships weren't here, the Commonwealth wouldn't be able to answer back at all, but they're here. So the number of surface vessels, which is 2 in this example, I probably had more before I returned to base by mistake. But let's just pretend I was smart and I said, oh, well, I'll leave a few left over here and I'll send the rest home to join back up with the big fleet or something. I hate to have to do the reverse time, but I want to make sure to get a good demonstration here for you guys. So okay, so we've got 2 units, and in the surface naval units, the convoys don't really count for this, so it is just the naval, and so they're going to be rolling on the 2 to 3 column, which means an 8, 9, or 10 will destroy a subunit, so that's going to be a 30% chance. Let's see what happens. And they just missed it. Well, sort of just missed it. They needed an 8 or higher. They rolled a 6, so they actually missed. They actually missed. So, let's see. Okay, so that's it for strategic warfare. It's very simple, right? It's just a quick roll of the die. Now, this doesn't impact production because we've already calculated production and everything, but now we've hurt the Commonwealth's pipeline, and now they would get 1 less resource next turn unless they send out a replacement convoy to the Pharaoh's Gap, which I think somewhere over here they do have a stockpile of extra convoys, so this is going to be a relatively simple thing for them to go fix. Um, but this was still a pretty good showing for the Germans there with being able to take out one convoy. So I'm gonna save just so I don't lose anything in case I crash. Okay, and so now we're gonna do the adjustment of morale. And I'm going to just go through here and go through my notes and compare that to my out-of-game notes where we did production, so just bear with me. Again, if you're doing this on your own in a game, you've probably got plenty of paper or Excel spreadsheets that you're using to sort of keep track of stuff. But okay, so the way this works for adjusting morale is that for every production point you spent on the home front, you get 2 positive morale. Yeah. I'm just checking the rules. So 14.1 on page 27 of the latest rules. If you look there, it's got a pretty good example showing that, if you spent 12 build points on the home front, that would be plus 24 morale. So if we look at Germany, Germany spent 8, which means they get plus 16, which sort of brings the total to 13, negative 13. Actually, I should probably stop there for a second. So the other thing that we could do here, and I probably should explain, is subversion. So I'm going to hit save for a second. We'll pick that up in a moment. If you go into the rules and you scroll down in the PDF to section 15 for politics, a lot of the things in that section of the rules we're going to cover in another video, but under 15.2, other political actions, there is a section called subversion. And subversion is performed during the morale step with political points saved from the previous turn or earned during the current turn. Each side may choose one active major power on the other side to subvert to add to that country's morale loss. The cost is 2 political points per 1/10 of morale plus 1 per additional point. So basically, in the example that I have here, 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 9 political points to subvert a major power by 0.3 points of morale. That'll eventually get cheaper when you target certain countries later in the war. But it's basically progressively more expensive for every point you try to do. And if we look at our available political points for each side, because ultimately each side's doing this, and I'm not sure what order you're supposed to do it. I think what you should probably do in terms of play order is just both sides, talks among themselves or whatever, write down what they're spending and who they're targeting, and then both reveal that at the same time and add those numbers to the whatever country's total morale calculation. So give me 1 sec, guys. Sorry, I had to step away for 1 second. Okay, so if we look at the political points that are saved up right now, the Allies have a measly, what looks like 12? Is that really only 12? Probably. Okay. So they only have 12. The Central Powers have 13 plus 25, so 38. 38. Okay. Um, so in terms of subversion, I'm not sure the Allies can spare it. They're probably going to want to use their political points to influence minor nations, to bring them into the war, or at least, um, like that's how you spend political points. You're either going to spend them on doing some subversion, or you're going to do them on some of those other political actions that you have there in the rules, and a lot of it is also going to be spent on influencing minors, which is really the first part of the political turn that you do. And it also gets progressively more expensive to try to influence a nation. So the more points you spend, the more likely they're going to shift in your direction, but it gets more expensive the harder you try to influence them. So I don't think that the Allies can actually afford to do much subversion. Maybe what they'll do is they'll do a little bit, and what they'll do is they will target Germany, and they will do, and again, I'm going to have to just do this in a particular order because I'm playing myself. But let's see. They're going to spend 5 to go down to 7 to do 2 more points of morale. So that ultimately becomes subversion equals minus 15. I mean, technically, I could just get rid of that and say, well, it's really applied to your total minus. So minus 31 plus 16, and I screwed up the math here a little bit, but there you go. So yeah, minus 15. So there you go. So that's what the current German calculation would now be, because of the 2 subversion points that cost 5 political points. Now, the Central Powers, guys, is World War I. They have plenty of points to spend. So let's see, if they wanted to do, let's say the Commonwealth, because I think the Commonwealth has already taken quite a hit, and we just want to pile on as much as possible. So let's see, 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6. It gets more and more expensive the further you go, obviously, but let's see, 9, 14 equals 20. Now they could spend 20 and influence the Commonwealth by 5, and I think that's what they'll do, just because it's gonna be a big problem for them. So that'll work. So if they're at 38 now, we're gonna spend 20. So they're gonna go to 18, and that's gonna increase the Commonwealth's penalty by 5. So they're at negative 37. So we'll just we'll do that. So that's the subversion that the sides both decided to do. And now we can actually do the proper morale impact. So let's continue going on. And what we'll just do now is, because we know what Germany's going to have, so let's interpret this. We have minus 31 total, plus 16 for production gives us a minus 15. For every 10, you shift down on the morale chart here. So 10 goes down, and now we roll a die. If it's a 5 or less, we shift down another level. And aha! It is a lucky day for Germany. They don't suffer another loss. So Germany only went down by one shift. That's really important because if Germany ever goes to 0, the Central Powers just lose the game. So Germany needs to hang on for dear life as much as they can. And that subversion ended up not being super effective for them. Let's see. Now we have Austria-Hungary, which spent 2, so they get a +4. And so they're just at -3, and so we'll roll a die, 3 or less, and it shifts down. Ouch! And here we thought the Austro-Hungarians were going to get away with not having a morale loss, but they got unlucky here, and that 30% chance of morale dropping occurred, so they're going to go down by 1 here, which is a shame, really. Okay, next we have the... I did this a little bit out of order, but next in my notes over here that I'm looking at, we had the French. So they had +8 because they spent 4 production, so +8 equals, that would be a -13. So again, for sure, they're going to drop by 1. And then we're going to roll a die, and if it's a 3 or less, they drop another 1. Nope. So the French hold on a little bit. They only went down by 1. Next are the Russians, and they spent a total of 8, so they get the +16, like the Germans did. And what that's going to bring it is to a -11. So for sure, the Russians will go down by 1. And then if we roll a 1, they'll lose another 1. And we don't, so they're good to go. And then let's see, so who's left? The United States doesn't have any morale impact, but our poor friends here in the Commonwealth, so they spent 5, which means they get a +10. Simply means they're at 27, -27. I should make sure to notate that everywhere. So this is pretty rough. Let's find the Commonwealth here. Here we go. So 27. So for the 20, we shift down 2. 1, 2, and now we're going to roll. And if it's a 7 or less, they drop yet another 1. Oof! They got lucky. They got real lucky. They just managed to stop themselves from dropping down yet another 1. So, not too bad. Not too bad. So let's see. Let me save my files again here real quick. Okay, so let's look at, before we end the video, because this is all I really wanted to cover, and we're coming in at just 43, 44, 45 minutes long-ish. Before we move on to the next, segments of the turn, I want to just take a look at the morale situation, because again, the game pivots on this morale chart. It really dictates a lot. You can see like China starts pretty low on here, Japan starts pretty low on here. Italy will start low once they enter the game, same with the Ottomans, but then already you have the Austro-Hungarians, the Russians, and the Commonwealth down to what is the 12 marker, which, that's a pretty big drop, all things considered. The French only went down a little bit, the Germans only went down a little bit, obviously the Americans are fine. So, as is right now, everyone's fine in terms of morale. They're not, having any big issues. It's dropping because of everything going on with the war, but it's not a big deal yet. But over the next few turns, what will start to happen, probably not until sometime in 1915, spring or summer 1915, you could start to see some of these guys drop down here. And the net effect of that is that once they reach 10, that's when things start to have effects, and there are military effects and there are civil effects, military and civil. So when it gets to 10, you have this, which means that fist icon that is existent in multiple places of the map, like here, increase by 1 in controlled territory by 1. So there's a chance that it's basically increasing the possibility of partisans showing up. On the military side, you have this one in the parentheses. What that means is anytime you try to perform a naval move or you attempt to attack with land units, there is a 10% chance that your units will refuse to attack. Now, a 10% chance isn't very large, but you can imagine over an entire turn you're going to be rolling lots of dice. There's going to be a chance where you really wanted to launch a really great attack and you failed to do so. And this could cause some issues if you were attempting to use offensive points to power up units. You'd then have to select different units to power up, which may not have been the most ideal that you wanted to use, and everything else. So that begins to be a problem. If you shift then down to 8, which is where I think this is the China flag, and if you get down here, that 10% chance becomes a 20% chance that they refuse to attack, and your partisan values increase even more. If you can get the Commonwealth down to 7, South Africa declares independence, and they lose access to the units for South Africa, and they don't get the resources for South Africa anymore. That's a pain in the butt. If it drops down again, now non-home country partisans are red. So basically that means any territory that isn't your home country are now red, and so that might mean that I'm just going to pull one off the top of my head, I guess, but let's say you're the Commonwealth and you've got a nation that is a colony in Africa. Well, had you gotten partisans there, they might have been pro-Commonwealth partisans. Now they're anti-Commonwealth partisans, which can be pretty tough. Then your attack refusal goes up to 30%, and now this is even worse. This is catastrophic, really. Anytime your units are attacked, so not when they attack, but when they're attacked, there is a 10% chance that they just surrender right away and get taken off the board. And you can imagine, okay, if that happens in a critical spot, that might open up the lines of the front to now the enemy's taking more of your cities and resources, and your morale's going to drop even faster. You get the Commonwealth down to 5. India declares independence, so they lose the units, they lose the factories and resources, which is pretty devastating. And at that point, the economy of the Commonwealth is probably fallen apart already. You get down to 4, then partisan values are increased even more. Your refuse attack goes up to 40%, which means, that's a lot of attacks that all of a sudden are not going to happen at all. And then a 30% chance your guys just evaporate. And again, it's getting worse and worse, but these previous effects are probably increasing the likelihood that you're going to drop. So it just becomes, again, I keep referring to it as a death spiral because it really is that way. It's hard to bring yourself up once you start going down. If you get down to 3, treat all controlled areas as red partisan value. So anytime on the partisan table you roll and it affects an area where you control or have units or whatever, they're against you, even in your home country. So you could liken this to in the real life historical scenario of Germany with the government sort of being overthrown because people were rioting and they didn't want the war to continue and they were being influenced and all this other stuff. That's going to happen, and obviously that's hugely devastating. And then once you get down to 0, which is below the red line here, revolution, that's going to have a number of different effects, potentially, depending on who you are. If you're Russia, then the Russian Civil War is going to start, which is sort of a mini game within a game that is really kind of neat, but I won't be able to really do much in terms of videos for it right now. If it's like France, then France is going to peace out. If it's the Commonwealth, they might peace out. They will probably peace out. If it's Austria-Hungary, then they're going to break up, which is some special rules that are kind of interesting. And then if Germany hits this point, that's the end of the game for the Central Powers, because Germany is basically the driving force of the Central Powers. If Germany goes down, the other Central Powers just aren't going to put up a fight. Not worthwhile at that point. So morale is a huge deal in this game, and it basically, I haven't talked enough about it, but it is going to drive a lot of decision points. The more aggressive you are, the higher chance that bad die rolls are going to eliminate your units, increasing your morale losses and contributing to your morale marker dropping on this chart. If you don't attack enough and kick your opponent down to the ground, then their morale might be able to hold steady or increase. And so you're sort of playing that balance. So when's the right time to attack? Where do I attack? And it adds a layer of strategic choices and decision making that I really like, and that's part of what makes World War I different than World War II. World War II, World in Flames, doesn't really have a morale mechanic, at least not in a normal way. You can conquer countries and everything, but not like this, where you can basically get kicked out of the war or be or lose the game without even, like historically was the case. Germany was not being invaded in World War I when it lost the war. It basically, the government was falling apart, and the military structure was falling apart, and they pieced out, and that's something that can happen in this game, and very well could happen, very likely that could happen. Let me see, is there anything else I want to talk to here? The only way for your morale to go up is if, let's say, on our little calculations here, you got very low negatives, or maybe you didn't lose anything at all, and that could happen in a winter month. If there aren't any attacks and you don't lose any units, then maybe your morale loss is very low. Maybe it's only 0, or it's minus 2, 3, or 4, or 5, depending on some of these other types of things going on, like home cities being captured or whatever. But then your bonus from production now outweighs the negative, and you've got a positive number here. You roll that die, or if you're lucky enough for it to somehow be 10, then your marker is going to get to go back up. Now, it can never go higher than where it originally started on the chart, but that's a pretty big deal, I think, if you're able to increase your marker back up, because that's adding to the longevity of your power. So during the winter months, when there aren't a lot of offensives, because the weather impacts of winter weather is going to mean a lot of attacks aren't worth it. It's just not worth bothering, or else you're probably going to lose that fight. So a lot of the time you're sort of stagnant, and you're spending your build points on rebuilding units, getting offensive points back, and obviously the morale, and that's your opportunity to try to recover your morale. But again, over time, it's just the trend is going to be down for everybody. And that's where the real fight's going to be, is trying to keep alive your power's morale so you don't hit revolution. But okay, I think that's all I wanted to cover for this video. I'm just going to save all my stuff here. We are now doing pretty well in terms of the sequence of play and getting towards the end of the turn. The only things we have left to do now is the peace phase, which involves counting out what's been conquered, then a couple of things related to any surrenders and a peace victory check. And then we get to the rest of the political actions, which is going to involve influencing minors, which again on this chart is the bottom and right side of the chart, of moving these markers for the different minor countries along the track to see if they join the Central Powers or the Allied Powers. And that's the other major way you spend those political points. So we'll start looking at that in the next video. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all the views and the good, encouraging comments from folks on Board Game Geek and YouTube. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. I'm going to be doing a few more videos on Fatal Alliances. We'll also be shifting gears to do videos on World in Flames, as well as other Hex Encounter games and card-driven games, and basically any games of this type, I'm probably going to be looking to do some videos on. I've got a collection that I have a lot of content I could produce for. So, yeah, thanks guys, and we'll catch you next time.